Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapter is 2 Samuel 11 and 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Both deal with the subject of our sin and how it impacts other people. 2 Samuel 11 starts by saying it's springtime, the weather's changed, and it's time for war. Can you believe these kings? It says it's the time the kings go out to war. In spring, they don't, hunt deer, they hunt each other, except David. David decides to stay at home, send Joab, his general, off to fight the Ammonites. But he's at his palace and bored. He's wandering around on his roof one day, looks over his balcony. The closest thing I have to David's balcony is this 7-meter high balcony at my old man's place. And you can see he's got a pretty view out there of fields and pastures. But David wasn't looking at pretty fields. He was looking at a pretty woman having a bath. And so he summons her, finds out she's married, but that doesn't stop this bored, powerful king. He sleeps with her. And that sin has an effect on her life and ultimately calamitous effects on her husband's life. At that point, David should have repented when he finds out she's pregnant. He should have repented. He should have been guilt-stricken before God and asked God to cleanse him. And forgiveness required from the husband, but he doesn't. He hides the sin. Like rotten meat under a carpet, he buries it and it gets worse. He brings back Uriah from the front line. He asks how Joab's doing, how the war's doing, and then he says to him, go home to your wife. He wants his wife to think, or Uriah to think that, he's produced this baby. But Uriah's too noble for that. He says, no ways. The king's armies are in a perilous situation. I'm not going to go and live in luxury with my wife. And so David tries to get him to do it again the next night, gets him drunk. He still won't go back. Very noble man. So David hatches a plan. He sends a message with Uriah back to Joab. Maybe Uriah couldn't read. Maybe just David banked on his nobility. He says, the guy who's giving you this letter, put him in the front line and let the enemy kill him. Withdraw, isolate him, let him die, which is what happens. So David's sin now has made Joab complicit. It's got worse, it's compounded, it's now resulted in death. And he then marries this woman, thinks he's doing the noble thing. No, there's some big lessons here. One, living bored isn't how God intended us to live. It's going to get us into trouble. Number two, God will always give us a way of escape. Jesus was tempted in every way and yet was without sin. We are told that, when we tempted, he will always give us a way out. And then when we do sin, we should confess it. If we don't, it'll rot, it'll get worse, it'll get darker. And it has dramatic effects on other people, which takes us to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And Paul here is speaking about food, sacrificed to idols, and saying, listen, the way we conduct our lives is important and it affects other people. And so he says, all food is okay. And, there are no real gods other than God himself. And so food sacrificed to idols, that isn't a big issue. Because in verse 8, food doesn't bring us nearer to God, or we're not worse if we do, or better if we don't. But he says, but this is in verse 9, but be careful how you exercise your rights, and that your rights don't become a stumbling block for the weak. Because he says this, some people think when they're eating food sacrificed to idols that they're worshipping idols. And so if you encourage them to do it, you're actually defying their conscience. And although it's just meat, it actually is putting them in a position where their conscience is defiled. Verse 12 says, when you sin against them in this way, you wound their weak conscience. You sin against Christ. When you live your life and exercise your freedoms in such a way and your liberties in such a way that other people look at your life and stumble, the same could be, I suppose, applied to drink. It's like cracking a bottle of a wine or a beer open in front of a recovering alcoholic and encouraging him, saying, no, go for it, man. And he then is emboldened by your liberty and winds up in trouble. And I suppose this is what Paul is saying in this whole chapter. He's saying, God's grace gives us liberty, gives us freedom, unparalleled, but we've got to be careful how we live and exercise that freedom, because Our sin affects other people, but sometimes even our lifestyle and our liberty affects other people. We should be living, David should have been living, with other people in mind. Pure conscience before God and with other people in mind when we exercise our freedoms. God bless you.